So we have already talked about the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. We've kind of just introduced what those two things are. Remember, the Magna Carta was signed by King John because he angered a lot of the nobility. Um, the whole purpose of the Magna Carta was to limit the power of the king because he was spending all their money and just kept raising taxes and raising taxes to fund wars and different things. Remember, we also talked about the English Bill of Rights and how it also limited what the government could do, and how these documents both influenced the foundations of the American government. So this goes into a little more detail about the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights. We'll talk about the Petition of Right, and we will talk about a couple of philosophers that really influenced the writing of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and we will talk more about all those later. So my instructions for you are, as I type, you write your answers in the blanks. Let me get a different color so you can see better what I am writing. I'll write in purple. So I've already told y'all that the Magna Carta was signed by King John. I want to make this a little bigger for you. There you go. So King John was not a nice man. Like I said, he robbed the people of a lot of things. He constantly taxed his people, even though they could not afford to feed their families, because he was very selfish. He wanted the money for himself to buy himself things, and he was also funding a lot of wars because he was trying to take over other lands. So the purpose of the Magna Carta was to limit the power of the king. Okay? And it introduced the ideas of limited government. Remember, we said limited government is when king has to follow rules. In a limited government, the king has to follow the rules. Really, in any kind of limited government, whether it is a monarchy or a democracy like we have, the leader of the country, the head ruler, has to follow the rules in a limited government. So you had due process of law, which means that all legal matters had to be done fairly. You couldn't just be go to court and then not be represented at trial. So you had to have also a trial by jury. Before the Magna Carta was signed, you didn't have juries, just the judge would decide on what your punishment would be. And say you were someone he didn't like, well, he might sentence you to something really harshly, which didn't fit the crime. So before the trial by juries, a lot of times the punishments did not fit the crime. And lastly, the protection of private property. Before the Magna Carta, King John would have his people come in and just steal the land away from the landowners so that he could have it for himself. And the result of the Magna Carta, and this is very important, I'd put a star beside it, it led to the establishment of the British Parliament and representatives of the people. So now we're going to talk about the Petition of Right, which came over 400 years later after the Magna Carta. This was signed by King Charles. Let me put it in purple for you. King Charles the First of England. The reason you need to put King Charles the First was because there was a King Charles the Second, King Charles the Third. They all like to have the same names. So in the Petition of Right, they established that there could be no cruel punishment. I think I said earlier, a lot of times the punishment did not fit the crime, and what I mean by that is, say you stole like $100 from someone, You might have your hand chopped off in response to stealing $100, and no one deserves to lose their hand because they stole something. So that would be an example of a cruel punishment. The Petition of Right said there could not be any cruel punishment. There could be no excessive bail or fines. So, in this time period, someone could get arrested and then have to pay, say you stole some candy. Well, they would have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars in bail money to get out of jail. So things had to match the crime. It couldn't be excessive. It had to be fair. Um, you had the right to bear arms, and this means that you could have guns or um, weapons in your home. You had the right to petition, so you could petition the government. Say you thought something was done wrong, well, you could address your concerns with the government. The king could no longer declare martial law. So that means he could not just tell his military soldiers to go occupy a town to bring the people under control. He couldn't do that anymore. So there could no longer declare martial law in times of peace or require homeowners to share their homes with the king's troops without permission from the owner. We will see this part right here, the homeowners part, take place before the American Revolution, because before the American Revolution, the colonists were required to clothe, house, and feed the British soldiers who were living in the colonies. Punishment of any person to be determined by a judgment of his peers. So not only did you have to have a jury trial, you also had a jury of your peers. So it had to be people kind of like from your own community. And this challenged what was known as the divine right theory, which stated that the divine right theory stated that God specifically ordained a king or a queen in power, specifically put this person in power, and that person could do whatever he wanted because he was put in place by God. Well, this challenges the divine right theory and said that even monarchs were expected to obey the law of the land. The English Bill of Rights was an agreement between Parliament and William and Mary. They were the ruling couple in 1689. This document prohibited a standing army during peacetime unless Parliament gave consent. So there couldn't just always be an army around during peacetime. They had to go home. All parliamentary elections would be free, so you didn't have to pay to elect people. The monarchy was forbidden to create and collect taxes without the consent of Parliament. So basically, the king couldn't just decide one morning when he wakes up, I'm going to raise taxes. He had to get Parliament's permission to do that. The citizens were given the right to petition the king without the fear of being punished. So even though the Petition of Right up here gave people the right to petition, you could still be punished for it. But the English Bill of Rights said you could petition the king and not be punished. So the document reinforced earlier rights approved in previous documents, such as the right to bear arms, no cruel and unusual punishment, and no excessive fines or bail. Finally, Parliament was given the right to free speech and debate. So we will see influences of the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights, as we in the U.S. write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So not only did those three documents influence the foundations of the American government, but there were certain philosophers. We've heard of Thomas Hobbes before. We're also going to talk about John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Charles Montesquieu. They all influence certain parts of our government. And when we finish these, we will be done with this little section. These are the things that lay the foundations of our government. So after we talk about them, we will start with the American Revolution and what caused it. So Thomas Hobbes wrote what he called Leviathan. It was a book that he defended the absolute power of the kings. And he said that everybody lived in the state of nature. But what is the state of nature? So he said that all individuals, let me put it in purple for you, were naturally equal. And everyone had to do what they needed to for survival. So the state of nature is basically like you are doing what you need to do to survive. You have to do whatever you have to do to feed yourself and your family, to clothe yourself, things like that. So, but Thomas Hobbes had a certain view of the state of nature. He said that humans were naturally, greedy, cruel, selfish, and quick to fight. So he basically said that people were quick to get in trouble and so since they were quick to fight, they were very selfish, very greedy. They needed kings to look out for them. So he believed that a king was the best form of sovereignty or the best form of rule. And once the people gave absolute power to the king, they had no right to revolt against him. So a revolt is you trying to overthrow the governor. And he said that the social contract was between the people. So the social contract was basically like this agreement between what should have been between the people and the government, but Thomas Hobbes said it was only between the people to kind of keep the peace. So John Locke wrote the two treatises of government. He said that we are all entitled to the natural rights such as life, liberty, and property. And that will become really important because when Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, he uses these natural rights of life, liberty, and property, but he changes them just a little bit, and he says that all people are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So John Locke said that the natural rights of life, liberty, and property were God-given. I can't spell. And could not be taken away or voluntarily surrendered. So the government can't take away your rights to life, liberty, and property. He said that these rights were unalienable or impossible to surrender. You can't give them up. Everyone is entitled to live once they are created. So once you are born, you are entitled to stay alive. Nobody has the right to murder you. Liberty, everyone is entitled to do anything they want so long as it doesn't conflict with the first right of life. So you can pretty much do, according to John Locke, whatever you need to do as long as it does not harm others. So people want to be as free as possible to make their decisions. Property, everyone is entitled to all they create. or gain through gift or trade, so long as it does not conflict with the first two rights. So, as you are entitled to all the property you can buy, all the property you can get, as long as it does not interfere with someone else's life or liberty. He said the natural rights of the people limited the power of the king. So he said that the natural rights of life, liberty, and property automatically should limit the government. He argued that the king did not have absolute power. His role was to protect the citizens. So John Locke said the king should always protect and look out for the people he rules, and that's the definition of a good ruler. If the king violated the rights, John Locke said the social contract between the king and the people was broken. So basically, John Locke said there was an agreement between the king to look out and do whatever was best for his people. And on the other side of that bargain, the people would support the king. So as long as the people supported the king, the king would protect the people and do what was right for them. And you could also phrase it like, as long as the king did what was right for the people and protected them, the people would support the king. So if the king broke the social contract, the people had the right to revolt and establish a new government. So this was one of the arguments that was used in the Declaration of Independence to explain why we were revolting against our mother country of England. We said that the king had broken the social contract and was not looking out for the best interest of the colonies, and therefore we had the right to overthrow the British government. So Thomas Jefferson used Locke's ideology as a foundation for the Declaration of Independence. Locke's idea of what we would come to call the representative government was also used in the creation of the government of the United States. So Thomas Jefferson said that Locke talked about the government should represent the people and always do what is right for the people, do what the people wanted. You also had a man named Rousseau. He thought that citizens should abandon their natural rights in favor of a social contract. Rousseau believed that direct democracy, with the citizens being the sovereign, was the best form of government. He did not agree with the representative government. So a direct democracy is we tell the government exactly what to do. Like the government kind of lets the people have all the power instead of us just electing representatives to do what is best for us. And lastly, Charles Montesquieu, who wrote The Spirit of the Laws, he believed that the need for food caused humans to associate with others and seek to build a society. And the main purpose of government was to maintain law and order, political liberty, and the property of the individual. So the government had to protect us, had to represent us. And he also came up with the idea of the three branches of government. Which would operate independently from one another with a system of checks and balances. And throughout this semester, we will learn all about the three branches and what checks and balances mean. But for now, I want you to know that the three branches of government are the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The legislative branch makes the laws. Executive enforces the laws. And the judicial branch interprets the laws. And we will talk all about that later on. So don't feel like you have to write that right there. Do write the three branches of government somewhere on your paper. I know you don't have a ton of room, but try to add it somewhere, maybe at the bottom. And lastly, Charles Montesquieu's theory on this issue eventually became the foundation for the United States Constitution. The legislative, executive, and judicial branches are all listed in the U.S. Constitution, and we will learn more about that later on. So make sure you have all of this, because this will become very important for the rest of the semester.